Well, it's come to my attention that you might be getting shortchanged in our study of the book of Romans. Or maybe a better word is just cheated. For I don't know how long we've been in this book, but it seems to me like we've been here for a long time. But as we were beginning our study in the book of Romans, I told you, you may not remember, but I told you I was driving down a street in Edmond. I saw this great big church building. Don't know what kind it is, but on their marquee sign, they were advertising their Sunday morning lesson, a survey of the book of Romans. This week, I passed by that same building, looked at that same marquee. They gave the title of their Sunday morning lesson, and they said Romans chapter 9, something like verses 13 through 20 or something like that. Romans chapter 9. And we're already in chapter 14. It's obvious that their speaker knows far more than I. But I will tell you, I'm doing the best I can. It's all I know. Now, I see visitors here like Danny Turner. I kind of have the idea that he ought to move back to Cordell because he is an excellent preacher and he can do this for a while. Or maybe Scott could do it. I'm not sure, but we need help. So we're going to give it a shot anyway. Second lesson in Romans chapter 14. I wonder if you can remember where we were last week. I know that Romans 14 is not an easy chapter. Book of Romans in some ways is not an easy book, but it's a powerful book. And it can change your life. I remember years ago, Susan's cousin, Jan Hannon, made some kind of a statement like this to her. She said, I've always been told if you ever get the book of Romans, then Christ will have you. Well, I kind of wish that could happen to all of us. I hope that can happen to all of us. But this is difficult material. Remember the verse? Except those whose faith is weak, without quarreling about disputable matters. And so last week we talked about three things. Remember, what does it mean faith is weak? And disputable matters, and accept without quarreling. Well, now we enter into a second really big subject in Romans chapter 14. And the subject of Romans chapter 14, it seems to me more than anything else, has to do with this word called judging. Judging. I kind of want you to understand this judging thing from a different perspective. I really don't know what happens day by day during the workday week at our local courthouse in the courtrooms. Charles would know. He's there all the time. I know a little bit more about what happens in a Lubbock courthouse, very large, because every 2 years in Lubbock, Texas, you're going to sit on a jury panel, or at least potentially selected. And several of those judges are friends of mine. But inside that courtroom, usually it works like this. There will ultimately be a judgment rendered by a judge or by a jury, depending on the nature. There will be at least one attorney there, maybe more than one. And when that judgment is finally rendered, it will be based on statute. It will be based on written law. It will be based on code. For they will look at what has happened, they'll look at the situation, they'll evaluate what the law says, and they'll make a judgment based upon that law. Is that kind of right, Charles? That's not the kind of judging I'm talking about. That's not the kind of judging I'm talking about. I'm talking about the kind of judging that sadly I do almost every day of my life. And my guess is you do it almost every day of your life. We have this giant tendency to judge over and over again, even in a given day, and we judge on not the basis of law. We judge on the basis of our own conscience, our own level of spiritual maturity, our own feeling, our own conviction. Now, does everyone understand that? I'm judging about where I am today. And I look at you, and if you don't fit how I think about a particular subject, then somehow I render this judgment based upon my conviction, my level of spiritual maturity, or my level of faith, my conscience. I judge you based on mine. And that's what Paul is going to be talking about in Romans chapter 14. And it appears to be really serious. And so we're going to look at basically three principles that are outlined, and there are several verses of Scripture we have to read for each principle, and we're not accustomed to doing that exactly this way, but we're going to start in verse 1 and go through verse 4 to find the first principle. So Burke will have it on the screen. I'm just going to read it with you off the screen. That work? I can use the Bible, but one person's faith allows them to eat anything, but another person whose faith is weak eats only vegetables. The one who eats everything must not treat with contempt the one who does not, and the one who does not eat everything must not judge the one who does, for God has accepted them. Who are you to judge someone else's servant? To their own master, servants stand or they fall, and they will stand, but for the Lord is able to make them stand. Now, watch that one phrase. Who are you to judge someone else's servant? I don't know of any statement in the New Testament that has personally affected me more through the years than that one statement. That one single statement years ago had giant impact in my life. And so you would find me, whether you agree or not, you would find me being so very, very careful about any kind of judgment toward other people as it comes to the relationship with God. Very careful. Because what does that say? Who are you to judge someone else's servant? And what he's saying is this principle Burke's going to put up there, that says all judgment on disputable matters is reserved, belongs to God. Doesn't belong to me. In fact, as we move our way through this entire passage, you're going to find it to be so similar to what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 7. And I've often said that the entire New Testament seems to be a commentary on what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount. And this so parallels that. But when it comes to judging people based on my level of spiritual maturity, my conscience, how I feel about something, God says, wait a minute. How did you ever get that right? Whoever gave you that right? That belongs to me. You don't judge my other servants. And if you read that carefully as we were going through it, it says, though they may not be at the same level of spiritual maturity, and though they may do something a little differently, God has accepted them. Did you catch that part? Really, really interesting what that passage said. So that's principle number 1. Now we pick up in verse 5, we find principle number 2. Everybody doing okay? Did I have you nervous? Have you uneasy? I have myself uneasy, okay? This is not... I'm telling you, I am the world's worst. You don't compare to me. I do it all the time, and I see all the time it's wrong. One person, beginning in verse 5, considers one day more sacred than another. Another considers every day alike. Each of them should be fully convinced in their own mind. Whoever regards one day as special does so to the Lord. Whoever eats Whoever eats meat does so to the Lord, for they give thanks to God. And whoever abstains does so to the Lord and gives thanks to God. None of us lives alone. None of us dies for ourselves alone. If we live for the Lord. If we die for the Lord. So whether we live or die, we belong to the Lord. For this reason, Christ died, returned to life, so that he might be the Lord of both the dead and the living. Now, this next principle is a little difficult to get out of this, but if you read that carefully, and I know we didn't read it carefully, it's really talking about my conscience, my belief, where I am spiritually at this given moment of time in my relationship to God. And it's very, very personal. And your personal conviction is personal between you and God. Now, why is that important in this study? Well, you don't have to tell everybody everything you think or feel. Do you realize that? You don't have to tell everybody everything you think or feel. And some people just feel like they are compelled to do that. They got to tell that whole world where they stand on everything. And there are some things that are really personal. That old statement we use sometimes that silence is golden, sometimes silence is golden. And in the book of Proverbs, when it talks about the person who talks too much is really foolish, I have learned how to coexist with people. And I may think very differently about a subject than they. I've learned how to be quiet. I've learned how to navigate those waters fairly well. You don't have to tell everything you know, because when it gets right down to it, where you are in your spiritual maturity, we call it faith, where you are in your conscience, your conviction, may be different than where I am. You may be a lot more mature than I. But wherever you are, it's really personal between you and God expects you to keep it that way. Because when we talk about it too much, it almost sounds like we try to make everybody be at our level. I wouldn't want to bring you down to my level. Whatever your belief is, your conviction is, it's personal between you and God. Sometimes it ought to stay that way. Now, we keep growing. We keep changing. This is not an excuse not to grow. This is not an excuse to say, I got baptized in 1947. I am what I am. That's foolish talk too. Okay? We talked about that last week. We were supposed to be committed to growth. So let's do one more. Let's go to verse 10. You then, why do you judge your brother or sister? Why do you treat them with contempt? For we will all stand before God's judgment. We will all stand before God's judgment seat. It's written, as surely as I live, says the Lord, every knee will bow before me and every tongue will acknowledge God. So then each of us will give an account of ourselves to God. How does that make you feel? How does that make you feel? And it's kind of like what Jesus said over there in Matthew chapter 7. He said, you're spending so much time trying to deal with your brother's issue, that little speck in your brother's life, and you've got this big problem in your own life. And I'll tell you something that's very interesting. I have a lot of problems in my life. I have a lot of flaws in Ken Jones. And my guess is you have a whole lot of flaws inside of you too. And it is a full-time job to work on me. It's an absolute full-time job to work on me. And it should be such a full-time job that I don't have time to work on you. Everybody understanding that? Now, this may not be a good illustration. In fact, in one way I'll explain in a moment that it's not a good, but it kind of fits. Years ago, Susan and I were young marrieds, and we had been invited to go back to Oklahoma State. They gave me a faculty position there. I have often said, I continue to say, and I still believe it. It's the very best job I've ever had in my entire life. I don't remember one negative thing ever in that job. I loved it. And I was working some odd hours, and I was giving talks at night, and I was doing all this. And one weekend we decided we'd come back to Cordell. And I decided we'd leave on a Friday morning. And so we're driving that yellow GTO that I had, I wish I still had, by the way, down I-35, I think not quite to Guthrie, and we passed someone. And I looked over. It was my boss. He saw me, I saw him. And I thought, I'm going to be in trouble. He's going to wonder why in the world I'm leaving at this time on a Friday morning. So out of guilt, Monday morning, I marched into his office early. I said, you're probably wondering why. I was driving down I-35 with my wife in the car at that time of the day. He stopped me. He stopped me in the middle of my talk. Taught me one of the most valuable leadership lessons I've ever been taught. Been with me all this time. He said, I don't care when you work. It makes absolutely no difference to me when you work. All I care about is whether or not you get your job done. And he leans over to his right and opens a drawer down here somewhere and pulls out a form. Now it was 8 pages, 4 pages, but front and back, fastened together. And he hands it to me. He says, this is an evaluation form that everybody goes through on this university campus. And every year, I'm going to evaluate you based on what's on this form, and you're going to fill out the form. And he said, at the bottom you'll notice, and he showed me, it has these words, special merit, merit, satisfactory, or unsatisfactory. He said, whatever I circle will determine how I raise your pay. He said, if I were you, I would take this form and study it right now. And as you make your way through the year, I would make sure I was filling it out as I go, so that when it comes time for you to walk into my office and hand me this evaluation form, you already have it filled out. You have taken, essentially, account of yourself all year long. And he made me a believer. And I started right then filling out the form, paying attention to what I was doing, looking at what was going to be required, what was going to be evaluated, so that I still have them, still have the forms, so that he would circle special merit, and he did. How is that any different? Now, it's not working your way to heaven, but it's paying attention to who you are. It's paying attention to how you live. It's paying attention to how you navigate through life. It's being aware. There's coming a time where I'll give an account. I knew at a certain date every single year I walked in with that form, I would give an account. And I would present it. He would study it. He would call me back in. He'll say, here's what I've circled. I took it really seriously. And I have so many issues in my life. I think I better take it seriously right now. He says, we're all going to give an account before God. God is the judge of all of us. So it's like Paul is saying, Ken, why are you spending so much time trying to judge other people based on where you are at this moment in your life, how you feel, where your conscience is? That's God's business. Besides that, where you are is personal. You ought to keep it that way. If you just realize you got your hands full of dealing with yourself. You got your hands full dealing with yourself. Now, is that not true? If you really would be honest with yourself, is that not true for every single one of us? So now you begin to understand, how would I dare take the place, put myself in the place of judging someone else's servant? Kind of serious, isn't it? Have some good news for you. Even as you take a careful account of yourself, you'll find yourself frustrated day by day, or at least week by week. That's not the good news, by the way, because you can't keep it perfectly. You just can't do it. You just can't do it. Before the day is over, I will probably say, Suze, look at that person. They ought to know better. How could they possibly do that? But I know this. Jesus knew that. He wanted me to try. He wanted me to be aware. He wants me to walk that the best I can. But what he really said was, I know you can't do it. So I'm going to come and die. And I'm going to shed my blood so that I'll make up the difference for you. I'll make it happen so that you can stand before God and he'll say, well done.